Thanks. So I'm just going to adjust the microphone up a little bit. Actually, I'm just going to hold it. There we go. So, the green one. The large green button. Great. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about our field building work at Wellcome. And I mentioned earlier that I'm head of field building. And I'm going to describe what field building is. I know it sounds very exciting, even more exciting than funding opportunities. But what is it? I'm going to talk about what it is, talk you through some of our projects, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So the work of field building is really about the mental health field as a whole, about how it works, because what we have, and what we've heard described already today, is this absolutely fantastic machine that we have of research and of discovery. But does that machine, in which supposedly science, thoughts, ideas, previous research goes in one end, new ideas are generated, studies done, and then at the other end, what we want out are these outputs which will change people's lives. Is that machine working as efficiently as it might? And essentially our job in field building is to listen to the engine of mental health science, to see where the rattles are coming from, where there are things which could work better, which could help us to achieve our goals much faster than we are at the moment. So the first issue really is one of collaboration. So at the moment, what we have is quite a siloed field. So we have lots of different disciplines. And there are several problems with this as it is. One of which is that some of those disciplines don't understand each other. They don't understand each other's approach. Another one of which is that sometimes those disciplines will actively disagree with each other. That there will be the idea that maybe a medical approach to mental health problems isn't the right way, or a purely social approach isn't the right way. So there's actual ideological and intellectual disagreement as well. And then there's simply the fact that people are not aware of each other's work, are not aware of each other's approach. And into this, I add the importance of lived experience. Now, I first came across the importance of lived experience in research when I remember many years ago I was editing a meta-analysis on antipsychotics to prevent relapse and psychosis. This was for The Lancet, almost 10 years ago now. And what I remember was reading that even though the researchers could say that yes, continuing antipsychotic treatment probably did prevent relapse, there was very little data on whether this actually improved quality of life. There was very little data on whether this improved the prospects of employment or of sustained and sustainable relationships. And of course, if you're experiencing mental health problems, or if you're a clinician attempting to help people experiencing mental health problems, these are questions which in many ways are as important as whether or not these medications prevent relapse. And because of when the studies were done and the particular interests in the questions which they had to answer, these questions simply hadn't arisen during the process of research. And that limited the utility of the studies to individuals, to their families, and to clinicians. And that really impressed upon me the great importance of lived experience within mental health research, because really science is about asking the right questions and using the right method. And unless we have lived experience in the mix, I just don't see how we can do that, least of all in mental health. We also need a more coherent field. So common metrics were mentioned, and I will go into this more in detail, but what I'll say is that if you were to open any mental health journal, Lancet Psychiatry or JAMA Psychiatry or American Journal or whatever, British Journal, you might in a particular week or a particular month find 4 papers all about this thing that we call depression. And those 4 papers might all use different scales to define this thing we call depression and to measure this thing we call depression, to say whether it was there or not and how bad it was. That would make it, it does make it, very hard to understand each individual paper, and it makes it almost impossible to put one paper in context with another paper. And the other problem is that I think that affects trust. Because how do we know that studies are not being done which are showing statistical effects with a particular scale chosen, which might not actually be that important clinically? So it's a matter of communication and clarity, but also, importantly, trust. And that's just one of the issues in mental health science, where we lack common understandings, those common languages that would enable us to collaborate better within disciplines and between disciplines. And then finally, there's this issue of focus. Now, if you hang around long enough in mental health, you will see the silver bullet come and go. You will see certain therapies, certain medications, which are touted as if they're going to solve absolutely everything. There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of excitement, sometimes even a lot of investment. And then people are disappointed because we don't have a realistic idea, a realistic assessment of the chances of success. You know, would it be good enough if this medication or this new therapy worked moderately well for a certain proportion of people? No, it's always got to be the next huge thing. And we have this cycle of over-promising and of under-delivering. And maybe also of not really prioritizing the things which should be prioritized because we've got so excited by these shiny objects being dangled in front of us. So field building really aims to solve these three problems. And this is our vision for how the future of mental health science will be. For a start, an international field, a truly international field. So if we look at the global picture, I've been involved in global mental health in one form or another for many years now, for 14, 15 years. And I think that what we need to do is to really globalize knowledge in mental health. We need to have knowledge which is appropriate to local contexts, but we also need that knowledge to be spread and to move north, south, south, north, east, west. We can't just have single centers producing knowledge and exporting it. We've got to have a much more free structure for collaboration, for the exchange of ideas and concepts. And that includes really embedding lived experience. At the moment, if you were to do a study, you would feel very ill-equipped to carry out any study, I'd say, without a statistician on board. I think you should feel equally ill-equipped to carry out a study if you don't have lived experience on board. And so that's another thing that we want to embed into this collaborative process. We also need a coherent field. We need to understand concepts and definitions and metrics. However, that doesn't mean that we need to come to a single understanding on one occasion and then we all move on. We recognize that this will always be a slightly tentative process, a slightly temporary process. We've got to recognize that it will always need further work and further improvement. And then finally, we need focus. So we need to really identify those key areas of promise and to focus our attention on those areas if we're going to generate the changes that we want in the timescale that we want, which is the next 10 years. So I'm going to go through a few of the ways in which, I'm just going to check I haven't skipped a slide. Though I haven't, good. So I'm going to go through some of the ways in which we're achieving this. And the first is collaboration. Now, Taylor has just talked about our neuroscience call, and you will remember that one of the things Taylor said was that we wanted to have collaboration as an intrinsic part of this call. We wanted clinicians to talk to researchers. It's a radical concept, I know, but this is one of the ideas that we had. But then we thought, how do people find each other? How do collaborators find each other? So we have experimented with our friends at an organization called Neuromatch. And when we launched this call, we launched something else alongside this call. We launched a website. And if you went to this website, run by our friends at Neuromatch and designed with us, you could enter your research ideas, and then other people would enter their research ideas. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're a little bit worried that if you enter your research ideas into a computer that other people will read them and other people will steal them. You know, I know, you know, maybe being in research doesn't give you the brightest view of human nature. But we got around this by the fact that what Neuromatch does is its algorithm matches your ideas with other people's ideas without a human being actually being in the loop. So no human sees your ideas. It's just this algorithm. So we then matched people with potential collaborators using this system. And we have held a couple of online events in which people were introduced to their matches. So this was an experimental thing. It's run over the past month. We had the matching meetings last week, which were, You know, I like to think of them as like those scenes in Jane Austen novels where people go to a dance and have dance cards and meet each other. It's very civilized. But we'll see how that turned out in practice. We're going to assess the project, and that will help us to understand if this is one of the ways that we can help people to form collaborations, and if it's something that we might want to run with future events. So here's one of the coherence goals that we have. And this is a history of causes. So this is going to launch officially in a couple of weeks' time, but you get a preview here, and the website's actually live, so please feel free to go to it. The link is just there. History of Causes Co-UK timeline. So one of the things about mental health, I think, is that we don't actually understand our history very well. We don't understand where these concepts we have about what causes mental illness and what's associated with mental health, we don't understand where they come from. We don't understand how they've evolved. And with that, there comes a tendency to think of ourselves as being perhaps more separate than we are, to reinvent the wheel. So we commissioned some medical historians to come up with an interactive timeline. So you can go to the History of Causes timeline, and this will give you a link to the various types of cause, all the things which people have thought cause mental health problems. You can select by cause, you can get the timeline to run forward in time, backward in time. We have links to certain historical images and objects. We've also got a suggestion box, so if there's anything that we've missed, please feel free to suggest it. And this is a resource which is going to stay up. It's geared towards researchers. It's also geared towards the public. You'll see these boxes are quite short in the text, but you can click them and get more information. And we hope that it will really help the field to understand where its ideas are coming from, how they've developed. And one of the things we found out, which is quite interesting through this process, is that there are comparatively few new ideas in mental health science. That we have certain concepts about what causes mental health problems, and these concepts seem to recur in different forms, really, throughout history, certainly throughout the past 100 years. Now, at the moment, the computer is saying Holyland linking, but good. The slides have moved anyway. So I'm just going to talk about focus and about evidence synthesis. Now, this is a subject quite close to my heart, and this relates to that issue I said earlier about separating the hype from the hope. Evidence synthesis, I think, is absolutely key, because 400 years ago, when the first, I think, proceedings of transactions of the Royal Society came out, the first journal, you could read a journal of science, and that journal of science would contain all the research that you needed to know. We then split into the subspecialty journals, so we have Nature and the Lancet and the New England Journal, all emerging around 200 years ago, 150 years ago. And the idea was that you could read those medical journals, and that would contain all the medicine you needed to know. And then we got the further specialization until today we have many, many journals. And it's impossible to read and assess every single publication in mental health science. It's even extremely challenging to read and assess every single publication in particular important key areas of mental health science. So what we're doing with Galanos, it's a project run out of Oxford, which we're funding for the next couple of years. It's run by Andrea Cipriani, and the idea is that we're going to look at key areas which look promising. Our teams are going in and not only collecting the human data, but also the animal data. They are, in a unique process, then triangulating the human and the animal data and using those to really assess, is this a promising area? What needs to be done? What are the next research questions we need to ask? And these are also living reviews, so they are going to constantly update. The other thing to say is that these are open. They're completely free. They're open access. You can find them on Wellcome Open Research and on the Galanos website. We have lay summaries for non-experts. And the other thing, and this is something which has concerned me a bit about systematic reviews and meta-analyses over the past few years. When I was a medical student, systematic reviews were the big thing. They were the absolutely trustworthy source of information. And I'm afraid to say that in recent years, I've seen that decline. What I've seen is some systematic reviews, you can set the search criteria, and they can be almost weaponized. They can be used almost as op-eds. with the feel of science, but without the actual substance. And I think that the antidote to this is transparency. So not only can you read the reviews, but you can go to the Galanos website and you can download for yourself all of the data which has gone into these reviews too, and use it whichever way you choose. So it's a completely transparent process. The other thing to say, the final thing I'm going to say about Galanos, so you can go to the website and have a look, is that the success of any project in science, especially medical science, is based on how tortuous an acronym you can come up with. And this is one of the best, I think. So Galanos is, of course, the name of the great Greek physician, also known as Galen. But it stands for the Global Alliance for Living Evidence, so that's pretty straightforward so far, in anxiety, depression, and psychosis. There you go, that's pretty clever. So I'm now going to say a couple more words about common metrics. Now, I mentioned the challenge earlier of common metrics. I might have actually undersold the challenge. So if you actually look at the common metrics for depression, you'll find hundreds. You'll find over 200. I think maybe even over 300 different measures which can be used for depression. How do we find measures that are acceptable, that are free, that are easy to use, and which tell us what we need to know? Well, Wellcome has got together with all of these other groups, the NIMH, Grand Challenges Canada. This is the Medical Research Council in the UK, MQ, which is a UK-based mental health charity. Also journals, Lancet Psychiatry, JAMA Psychiatry, and another charity, the Movember Foundation. We have an advisory board, and this is also under the umbrella of the International Association of Mental Health Research Funders. And we have looked at what common measures we can recommend and indeed mandate. And so far, we've got the PHQ-9 for depression. We've got the GAD-7 for anxiety. For younger people, there's the RCADS-25. And then for function, we have the HUDAS scale. Now, we know that these are not the best measures. In fact, I rather doubt that the best measures exist. One of my favorite concepts in mental health is the concept which a great child psychiatrist called Donald Winnicott came up with, which is the idea of the good enough parent. I like the idea of the good enough measure. These measures are good enough. They are free, they are easily accessible, they are quick and easy to use, they are patient reported. What we want is for every study which we fund to use these measures as appropriate. By that, I don't mean that these must be the primary outcomes, far from it. I certainly don't mean these should be the only outcomes, but we need you to collect them depending on the particular patient population which you're studying. You might ask, what about psychosis? And you might well ask, we are currently working on that. We're working on what measure would be appropriate for psychosis, and then the sort of feasibility and practicality of that. We will be publishing some details of the recommendations for these measures and for the psychosis measure soon, and we look forward to refining this process and receiving feedback on it. So, I'm now just going to end by talking about lived experience. What do we mean by lived experience? And it's very common to think of lived experience as just people's stories. I think we've all been at conferences where lived experience is really used as someone just sort of telling their story. And that can be interesting, and I think it can help to generate a lot of empathy, and it can even be quite inspirational. But I think that lived experience goes beyond that. It's actually a form of expertise in itself. And in a way, it's the most important form of expertise because it goes at both sides of the research question. It goes as to how we generate the research question in the first place. What questions do we ask? And then at the other end, the products which we want to come up with, which are better treatments. Well, you know, how acceptable are they? How practical are they? And of course, no individual can represent the entire community, but they can provide their own angle on things, their own form of expertise, and that I think is really vital to mental health research. So by lived experience, we mean people who identify as having experienced anxiety, depression, and psychosis. They might be experiencing it now. They might have experienced it in the past. They don't need necessarily to have been diagnosed by professionals or to have accessed services. And lived experience really sits, as I mentioned earlier, under the collaborate part of what we do. I'm just going to get everything up there. So how do we involve lived experience at Wellcome? Well, firstly, as you'll see in a moment, we do actually have a dedicated lived experience team within the program who make sure that any project that we do involves their expertise. And they have a global group of advisors who you'll see in a moment. We also expect the projects we develop or fund to meaningfully involve people with lived experience expertise. And this is a hint if you happen to be applying for our funding, which is don't skip the box about lived experience. Don't think that you can just put something generic in there or something sort of slightly cursory, because your application will be seen by people with lived experience. They will be assessing that and assessing it quite strictly. So please think about this. Don't skip that. Don't think it's a nice to have. It's a vital to have if you're applying for Wellcome funding. And then there are broader projects to integrate this expertise into the wider mental health ecosystem as a whole. Remember what I said earlier about getting the statistician on your project. I think there's hopefully a future in which lived experience expertise is embedded in each project. And looking at our fantastic lived experience experts, what wonderful people. Why wouldn't you want these people involved in your research team? As you can see, we have experts who are really from all over the world, from all parts of life. They've all had different experiences. It's an absolute pleasure to work with this team on the projects which we devise and on the projects that we fund, and I can thoroughly recommend it. It's certainly improved my thinking on mental health, it's certainly improved my practice, and I would really encourage you to do so as well. So that's really a tour through mental health at Wellcome, and specifically through field building. We are slightly ahead of time, actually, which gives us plenty of time for questions. So happy to take any questions, but thank you very much for listening. So I'm now joined by Anna and Taylor. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask about any aspect of what we've talked about. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, we're applying for one of your neuroscience grants, and it's a brain organoid study. Researchers just found the first small molecule that repairs myelin damage.
Right.
So we're wondering, since white matter deficits are involved in schizophrenia, if we could, as part of the grant application, screen similar compounds
Right.
for efficacy and safety, or is it pure neuroscience and not screening?
Okay, we're not able to answer really specific questions about each grant application because we've got to be fair to everyone. But if you go to our grants page, there's an email address which you can email, and we'll be able to address that then. This is just in the interest of being fair to everyone.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Just to add, part of the grant application process, we do a scope check. So if you look on the funding call page, you can put in your question or a summary of what you're trying to look at, and you'll get a response back saying whether this is within scope or out of scope. So that might help too.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, there's someone with a hand up the back.
On your last slide, right? On your last slide.
Yeah,
How come nobody come from the United States?
from the United States. Okay, well that's a deficit which we shall attempt to remedy. Is there a reason?
There is. It's really, really difficult organizing our meetings with all the different time zones, and we had to make some decision somewhere. So we picked the UK, and we went in one direction. We would like to expand, including North America and South America, and it's something that we are looking towards.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I don't know how we get questions from people online, or if there are any, but okay, that might just be streaming. Okay, well, if there are no other questions and everyone's just keen on having an extremely long coffee break, we'll be around for the rest of the day. So I understand if you don't necessarily want to ask a question in this format, but please feel free to approach us. We're more than happy to talk to you. Thank you very much for listening. We're now going to go to a break, and we'll assemble again, I think, at 1:15. Yeah, all right. Thank you.